Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang. I shall now request Narayananji to initiate the puja. Narayanan sir.
ओम अच्युताय नमः ओम अनंताय नमः ओम गोविंदाय नमः शुक्लां वरदरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्याये सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये अयमूर्त समूसर दोस्तों मान दोनों क्रंदो अयमूर्त समूसर दोस्तों तदेव लग्नं सदिनं तदेव तारवलं चंद्रवं तदेव विद्यावलं दैववलं तदेव लक्ष्मी विदेन्द्रियं स्मरामि ओम भो ओम भुव ओम सुव ओम मह ओम जन ओम तद ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सोदर्वणीयम भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ओम आप ज्योतिर्समृतं ब्रह्मस्वरम् ममोपात समस्त दुर्द शैत्वारा श्री परमेश्वर की चित्तन कर्ष्य मानस्य कर्मणः निर्वहन प्रसन्नतम आदौ विघ्नेश्वर पूजा कर्ष्ये पृथ्व्या मेरु तुलसी सूरम चंद्रकुर्म देवता पृथ्वी दिया तुर्दा लोकातीतम विष्णुना तुर्दा त्वं सतारे मम देवी उत्तरं गुरुशासनम आगमार्थं तु देवानां कमनार्थं तु रक्षासां कंडार्वं करामि यादव देवदवानलांजनम् नमोपात समस्त दुर्द शैत्वारा श्री परमेश्वर की चित्तम निर्बंध सिद्धत माधव विघ्नेश्वर पूजा कर्ष्ये गणानां त्वा गणपतिं नमामि कविं कवीनां सत्रमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पते आनुशृण्वन्ति सीतादनम् अस्मिन् दरिद्रबिम्बे महागणपतिं ध्यायामि महागणपतिम् आवाहयामि। ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसनं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः पाद्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसमनीयं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः औपचारिकस्नानं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः स्नानानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदातम् अक्षदां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः यज्ञोपवीतार्थम् अक्षदां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धान् धारयामि समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः गन्धोपरि अक्षदां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः रङ्गनाथम् अक्षदां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः हरिद्राकुङ्कुमं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः पुष्पै पूजयामि ओम शुंभगाय नमः ओम एकदंताय नमः ओम कपिलाय नमः ओम गजकर्णकाय नमः ओम लंबोदराय नमः ओम विघटाय नमः ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः ओम विनायकाय नमः ओम धूमकेतवे नमः ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः ओम बालचंद्राय नमः ओम गजाननाय नमः ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः ओम सूर्पकर्णाय नमः ओम एरंबाय नमः ओम स्कंदऊर्जवाय नमः ओम सिद्धविनायकरे नमः ओम शंकरमोक्षविनायकरे नमः ओम आत्मपुरविनायकरे नमः ओम महागणपतिये नमः नानाविधपर्वणपत्रपुष्पाणि समर्पयामि धूपार्थं समर्पयामि दीपार्थं समर्पयामि अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवी सविता विश्व सत्यम दर्शन प्रसंजामि अमृतमनु स्वाहा ओम प्राण स्वाहा अपान स्वाहा ओम ज्ञान स्वाहा उदान स्वाहा ओम समान स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः। उडने नाट्यचक्रे नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपचारं सूत्रावसं समर्पयामि कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। गणानां कविं कवीनामवपुत्रं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पदे आनुकूल्यकुशीलालं महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि। महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः महागणपतिये नमः। वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसादं शिरसा करोमि। ओम भुव ओम स्व ओम मह ओम जननं तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। उमापज्योतिर्समृद्धमुस्सरम् उमोपात समस्त दुर्गा चत्वारासु परमेश्वर पित्येत्तं शुभे सोमने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय परार्थे श्रीवेदे वराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे पादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरो दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगात्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावावृके प्रभादिनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये शुभकृतुनाम संवत्सरे दक्षिणायने गिरीशमर्दु खडगमासे कृष्णपक्षे पंचमी तिथ्यां शुभतिथौ भानुवासरयुक्तायां सदभिषक नक्षत्रयुक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभयोग शुभकर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायां अस्यां पंचमी तिथ्यां शुभतिथौ मम जन्म प्रति एतक्षणपर्यन्तं मध्ये संभाविधानं सर्वेषां भावानां सत्य अभिवृणार्थम् अस्माहं सहकुटुम्बानां क्षेमसद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्यनामभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्त मंगलाभ्यर्थं समस्त दुर्दोपशान्त्यर्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञान वैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये तदंगम कर्स पूजां स करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि सोमनार्थे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च। कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्रसमाचरित मूले तत्र सदुषो ब्रह्मा मातृकणे समृद्धा कुशौ तु सागरा सर्वे सप्तद्विभा सुन्दरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो प्रधान गंगे सैन्य गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी यस्मिन् सन्निधिं कुरु अंगैः सहिता सर्वे करुणा सरसां समर्था अयं देवपूजार्थं दुर्दशकारका। तंबूरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णु विष्णुकरे देवश पूजित पांचलिनमोस्तुते देवो देवालय प्रोक्तो जीवो देव स्नानन अंजानि निर्माल्यं सोयामोने पूजे। ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्तियुक्ताय योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिकूर्माय नमः अनंताय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रहदेवो नमः दशदिक्पालेभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेव महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परम ब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम अस्य श्री प्राणपुष्टाबन्धस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिदिग्गज सामधर्माणि संधांसि सकल जगत् सृष्टितति सम्मार्गाणि सम्मार्गाणि परिदेवता आम बीजम हरिं बीजम पौद्गलिकं दृष्टाभ्य विनियोग आमंगुष्टाभ्यां नमः ओम तर्जनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आमनाभ्यां नमः हरिघंष्टिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम करलकुष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम सिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रताय अक्षर क्रोम अस्त्रताय पट पूर्व सर्वदि दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्तांबोधिस्थ बोधोलस तरुणस्वर कराक्षे पासम गौदंडम इक्षुत मणिगुण पंचबाणात् विप्राणस्य कवालंतरेण सिद्धाप्ति नवसौरठ्या देवी बाधार गौरना बहुसुगरी प्राण शक्ति परान ओम आम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिं माम हम यम रम लम वम सम सम्म हम सोम अस्याम सोम हंस अस्यामुतो दिवदृष्टो अस्यामुतो सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस्य सस्यस्तोत्र जीव्या प्राणवाक पाणिपाद पायुपुस्तान याकस्ति स्वस्ति सुखम सुरम दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा ओम अस्य श्री प्राणपुष्टमन्दस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिरिगिरि सामद्रवाण सन्मांसि सकल जगस्थिति सम्मारकारिणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति क्रोम किलकम प्राणप्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिंद्रजनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभ्यां नमः हरिंगर्ष्टिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम करलकुष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं सरसे स्वाहा क्रोम सिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रताय औषध क्रोम अस्त्रताय पट पूर्वस्रवति दिग्बंध असुनीदे पुनस्माक्ष सक्ष पुनः प्राणमीनो जय भोगम जोग पश्यमे सूर्यमुच्चन्द्रमनुदेवयाने सुच्चि आवाहितो भव श्रद्धाविदो भव सन्नीतो भव सन्निहितो भव अवगुण्डितो भव सुब्रतो भव सुब्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामिं सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् दुःखं प्रतिभावेन पिण्डेऽस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु नमो भगवते श्री कुसेलाय मुसि कुबेराय नमः नमो भगवती श्री कुसेलाय मुसि कुबेराय नमः नमो भगवती श्री कुसेलाय कुबेराय नमः चतुर्नोति वंदन जन पौलस पुत्रपा लक्ष्मी प्रसीमानंद प्रिय ईश्वरा Now I am going to recite Bhagavan Sarvano Stotram. श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेव महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः अपार सच्चि सुगवारी राशौर्य शौर्यमात्रं भुवनं समस्तं गुणायुधं तं रमणं गभीरं चिन्ताविनमृति चिन्तयामि ओम महासेन ओम सेन जाताय नमः ओम श्री रमणाय नमः ओम गुरवे नमः ओम अगण्ड संविदागराय नमः ओम मौजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगद्गीतावताराय नमः ओम श्री भूमिनाथास्तज्योतिदाय नमः ओम पराशर कुलोत्तंसाय नमः ओम सुंदरातवत्पलाय नमः ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः ओम सयाम्बा सयावते नमः ओम शोणासुरमौलीन मानसाय नमः ओम स्वर्णस्तगाय नमः ओम श्रीमद्वादशांगमास्त्रे रक्तविद्योदयाय नमः ओम महाशक्तिनिवादेन प्रभुताय नमः ओम परमार्थविदे नमः ओम दिग्विराय नमः ओम पितृप्रदान्वेषिणे नमः ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृविदे नमः ओम पितृराज्यस्थोणशैलं प्राप्ताय नमः ओम तपोमयाय नमः ओम उदासीनाय नमः ओम महायोगिने नमः ओम महोत्साहाय नमः ओम कुशाकृतिये नमः ओम शान्तसङ्कल्पसम्भ्रमाय नमः ओम सुसुन्दृसे नमः ओम सवित्रे नमः ओम स्थिराय नमः ओम तपस्विद सर्वांगाय नमः ओम बुल्लाभूज विलोचनाय नमः ओम चंद्रिकासितास श्री मंडितानिन मंडलाय नमः ओम सूदवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः ओम सूर्यदाख्य विप्रमाय नमः ओम वेद वेदांत तत्वज्ञाय नमः ओम चिन्मुत्रिणे नमः ओम त्रिगुणाधिराय नमः ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः ओम विराजित जलाकृतिये नमः ओम उच्चित्त नयनाय नमः ओम पूर्णाय नमः ओम रसिदासुर तांडवाय नमः ओम गंभीराय नमः ओम परमाचार्याय नमः ओम सुप्रसन्याय नमः ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः ओम दक्षिणासी निवाय नमः ओम धीराय नमः ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः ओम स्वराजे नमः ओम महर्षिये नमः ओम भगवते नमः ओम ईट्याय नमः ओम भूम विद्या विशारदाय नमः ओम विमलाय नमः ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः, ओम आप्ताय नमः, ओम ऋतुमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः, ओम समुद्रुसे नमः, ओम सत्यत्रुसे नमः, ओम सत्याय नमः, ओम प्रसादाय नमः, ओम अमृत विक्रमाय नमः, ओम सुकुमाराय नमः, ओम सदानंदाय नमः, ओम मृदुभाषिणे नमः, ओम दयार्णवाय नमः, ओम श्री सोणासुर युरुद्भूत स्कंदासन निकेतनाय नमः, ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टने नमः, ओम सद्भक्त वृंद परिवृताय नमः, ओम गणेश मुनि प्रिय सेविता सुरोरुहाय नमः, ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि ग्रंथ संसिन्न संशयाय नमः, ओम वर्णाश्रम पदाधीताय नमः, ओम रसज्ञाय नमः, ओम सौम्याय नमः, ओम आत्मवदे नमः, ओम सर्वावनिमस्तानां महारात्याय नमः, ओम सर्वसत्पुण्ये नमः, ओम आत्मारामाय नमः, ओम महाभागाय नमः, ओम मातृमुक्तिविदायकाय नमः, ओम विनदाय नमः, ओम विनुदाय नमः, ओम विप्राय नमः, ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः, ओम भावगोज्वलाय नमः, ओम दर्शनादक सम्मारणे नमः, ओम मौलेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः, ओम ऋचान्तिकर्षानित्याय नमः, ओम स्मरणात्मन्दमोचकाय नमः, ओम अंधत्मिचन्नां सवे नमः, ओम संसारन्वतारकाय नमः, ओम सोणादिष्टिष्टरे नमः, ओम आर्तविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः, ओम अविच्युत निजप्रज्ञाय नमः, ओम नैसर्गिक महातपसे नमः, ओम कमंडलुधराय नमः, ओम सुप्रगविनवसनाय नमः, ओम गुहाय नमः, ओम दंडवाणीय नमः, ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः, ओम पौरवपिशक्पराय नमः, ओम स्कंदाय नमः, ओम देवतमाय नमः, ओम अमर्त्याय नमः, ओम सेनानीय नमः, ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री कार्तिकाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री मुरुगाय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री वल्ली देवाय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री स्वामीनाथाय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः, नमो भगवते श्री नटराजरे नमः, नमो भगवते श्री भैरवरे नमः, नमो भगवते श्री नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री शिव पार्वतीये नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः। हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम। Let us all recite Upadesa Saram. Katturagya prapade phalam karma gimbaram karma dajjadam kriti mahadado padana karanam palamasasvadam gadi nirodhagam ईश्वरार्पितं नेचयाकृतं सिद्धसोदगं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवाङ्मन कार्यमुद्दमं भूजनं जव चिन्तनं क्रमा जगतैसदी युग्धसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवपूजनं उद्धमस्तव दुज्जमन्दद सिद्धजं जव ध्यानमुद्दमम् आज्यधारया श्रोदशासमं सरलचिन्तनं विरलदबरं वेदभावना सौवमित्यसौ भावनाभिधा भावनीमदा भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनाबला भक्तिरुद्धमा इरुस्तरे मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोगवो दाच निश्चितं वायुरोदना लीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोधसाधनं सिद्धवायव सिद्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्वै शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदम्बुनर् भवदिनो मृदं प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसं वेगचिन्दना नासमेत्यद अष्टमानसो पृष्ठयोगिन कृत्यमस्ति किं स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारिणं सिद्धमात्मन चित्वदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं तु किं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अहमयं कुतो भवति किनवद हैपदत्यहं निजविचारणम् अहमिनाशवा यामहं दया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिज्ञमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अव्यल्यसत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीदम नामसेकस दज्जडं ससत् सत्वभासिगा चित्ववेदना सद्दया इचिद्दयायहम् ईसजीवयो वेषदीविदा सस्वभावतो वस्तु केवलं वेशानद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईसदर्शनं स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भया आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनचि ज्ञानमस्ति किं ज्ञातुमन्धरं किं स्वरूपमी आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा आपूर्णसि सुखं बन्धं त्यजी कम्बरं सुखं विन्ददीयै वस्तुदैविक अहमवेदकं निजविभानकं महति तं तवो रमणवाग्यं महति तं तवो रमणवाग्यं महति तं तवो रमणवाग्यम्। अरुणाचल ओम नमो भगवती जी अरुणाचल रमणाय नमो भगवती जी अरुणाचल रमणाय नमो भगवती जी अरुणाचल रमणाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम।
Namo Ramana. In continuation of our satsang for 42 select verses from Bhagavad Gita, we shall be going through the last two verses this evening. These two shlokas drawn by Bhagavan from the last chapter of the Gita, that is the 18th chapter, indicate that surrender to the Lord is not an external act. Rather, it's an incessant drawing in of one's attention to that awareness which is self-shining in the heart of all beings. For this session, as always, we have Raghavji with us, a long-time devotee of Bhagwan and a resident near the ashram. I do not think I need to introduce him again after nearly an year. So I would request Raghavji to take over and guide all of us. So.
सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। वन्दे श्रीरमणर्षेः आचार्यस्य पदाब्जम् यो मे दर्शयदीशं भान्तं ध्वान्तमतीत्य पार्थसारथिरूपेण श्रावयित्वा शुभाङ्गिरं पार्थस्यात्तिहरो देवः कृपामूर्तिः स पातु नः। Namaste. Today we continue our study of Bhagavan's the song Celestial, the Gita Saraha. We are reaching the conclusion of his selection of 42 verses. And Bhagavan's final concluding verses reiterate the main purpose for which the Gita was taught in the first place, which was for the freedom from distress of Arjuna. So with all that, all the understanding and all the sadhana which we do, it ultimately has to deliver the goods, which is freedom from sorrow, freedom from distress. That core feeling of self-inadequacy, self-non-acceptance that every human being has as his capital with which he is born, as it were, that needs to be addressed. And that same self-inadequacy, self-non-acceptance, that feeling, I am not okay, I am not happy, which is a very direct kind of an experience, it will lead to the compulsive pursuit of all the purusharthas. That feeling needs to be addressed, and Arjuna in that situation in the battlefield only got a glimpse of the deeper existential problem that is there in him all the time. But that battlefield scenario kind of brought it out, and he had and developed the attitude of surrender to the Guru there. So which is why Sri Krishna Bhagavan graciously blessed Arjuna with the teaching. So that was the starting point. Arjuna's request, prayer to Krishna to free him from that agony, from the distress, which seemed to have no external solution. Because he was looking for a solution such as withdrawing from the battlefield, and Arjuna made it clear that that wouldn't actually solve anything related to that deep-rooted sorrow. Arjuna could see that, which is why he requested Krishna Bhagavan to give him that upliftment in the form of the teaching, which would free him from that sorrow. And so these two verses at the very conclusion of these 42 verses summarize and reiterate that very idea. We will read and chant that and see how Bhagavan has tied up this whole message of the Gita with these two concluding verses in this 42 verse selection. The last chapter of the Gita is the 18th chapter. And that 18th chapter has these two verses. So in a way, the concluding verses of the selection are also from the concluding chapter of the Gita, the 18th chapter. We will chant the 61st and 62nd verses from the 18th chapter, which are Bhagavan's 41st and 42nd shlokas. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriddeshe arjuna tishtati Ramayan sarva bhutani yantra rutani mayaya Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriddeshe arjuna tishtati Ramayan sarva bhutani yantra rutani mayaya. So the verse says that Supreme Lord Ishvara dwells in the hearts of all living beings. Sarva Bhutanam, in the heart. Hriddeshe Arjuna, O Arjuna, that Ishvara dwells. Tishtati, he is situated there. Brahmayan Sarva Bhutani Yantra Rudhani Mayaya. Brahmayan, revolving, spinning around this entire world. So he spins around this entire world. Brahmayan Sarva Bhutani, consisting of all these living beings. Yantra Rudhani Mayaya. So that power of Maya is like the energy of this machine which spins all these living beings over and over again. So the Lord, by the power of Maya, has, as it were, mounted all living beings on a machine, and then he's spinning that machine around through the power of his Maya. And yet he is there in each living being. He himself is the actor and he himself is the play. So this is the last word of the Bhagavad Gita, this idea that Ishvara, present in all living beings, makes the whole world go round. All living beings think they have free will, but the Lord Ishvara here says that they are actually helplessly being spun around. We all think we have free will, but the truth is that Lord alone has created these gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Under the sway of these gunas, each living being will naturally express their swabhava, their nature. They think they have free will, but they're actually helpless. And so it is the will of the cosmic intelligence, the play of that cosmic intelligence, that this entire world is spun around, as it were, like on a machine, as if it were mounted on a machine. That is the import of this shloka. And like I said, we all think we have free will. That sense of doership is innate. And yet in retrospect, when we look back, if we analyze the entire flow of events, the entire flow of occurrences, there is very little free will in us. Ishvara alone does everything. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Ami yantra, tumi yantri. I am the machine and you are the operator, he used to say. In other words, when we look back and analyze either our life or the lives of most of the people around us, it appears that we were all helplessly flowing in this river of events and circumstances. And so this illusion of free will, of course, keeps things going. But the Lord alone is making things the way they are. So Krishna is highlighting this point because Arjuna is trying to resist that divine will. The divine will was Arjuna should fight on the side of dharma, exercise his kshatriya skills for the sake of humanity. And he was resisting that. He was not keen to do that because it was unpleasant. And so Krishna Bhagavan here says that, look, you are a kshatriya. Swabhava jena karmana svena karmana nibaddhaha, he says in an earlier shloka just prior to this, indicating that you are bound by your own nature, your own mix of sattva, rajas, tamas playing in this mind in so many ways. And so you don't really have that choice which you think you have to withdraw from this battlefield. Even if you were to go away, that very nature will again make you fight in some other future situations. You will still get caught up, and you might as well welcome this situation where there is a clear demarcation between right and wrong. You see, in many situations, it's not clear what's right and wrong. And it's natural to feel a certain hesitation, a certain diffidence. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I assert myself or should I be accommodative? So it's not easy to give a formula. Always be accommodative, be saintly. Well, that's not necessarily true. That's not what Krishna would recommend as a universal formula. It all depends on the situation. And so this binary is there. Should I be accommodative, which is also in a way correct, sensible in many situations, or should I be assertive? In general, of course, Krishna Bhagavan would say lean towards being accommodative, because our natural tendency is to be overly sensitive, overly assertive. So those who are on the Adhyatma Marga of self-inquiry, Krishna would say show maximum accommodation, which is why he went as an ambassador to the Kauravas, proposing that just 5 villages can be given to the 5 Pandavas, with the vast swath of the kingdom being kept by Duryodhana. So Duryodhana would get something like, say, 95% of the kingdom, and the Pandavas would barely get 5 villages. Krishna proposes that. And even that is rejected by Duryodhana. Absolutely no compromise by that person given to Adharma Duryodhana, which is when the battle kicks in. So many times in our own life as well, it's wise to show maximum accommodation, and until the situation really becomes black and white, one doesn't get into the battlefield, so to speak. But once that situation develops, Krishna says, this is a great dharma yuddha, and therefore it's a golden opportunity. There is no ambiguity that you are on the side of dharma, the other side is on the side of adharma. So you have waited until the polarization is so total. Don't hesitate now. That is Krishna's message to Arjuna. Don't hesitate. Your very nature is to stand up for what is right. And here it's very direct and clear what is right and wrong. And so Krishna is urging Arjuna, look, Ishvara alone makes this whole world go round, and your very nature, which I created, I as Ishvara have made you a Kshatriya, endowed with all these weapons and skills. And you are keen to fight on the side of dharma, O Arjuna. Because the very word Arjuna, Sri Shankara gives a very nice meaning, saying, Shukla Antakarana Swabhavaha, one whose mind is white, pure as crystal. So Arjuna, behind all that outer demeanor of a warrior, had a very clear, honest conscience, a very pure mind. So that was why he was called Arjunaha. The very word Arjunaha means clear, fair. And there's another reference elsewhere saying that Arjuna was actually dark complexioned. Okay, both Krishna and Arjuna were not fair skinned, they were dark skinned. And yet Arjuna was called fair. And the explanation given elsewhere is that that's because his heart was very clear. Okay, his heart was white and pure. So he was dark skinned, but he was a gem of a person in terms of being very honest, very committed to what is right. So that Arjuna is being evoked here, Krishna's message here. And he says, look, this is a clear case of dharma and adharma. Don't hesitate. You might have hesitated if there was some ambiguity, as is often the case. What is right, what is wrong? But here it's clear as daylight. What you're fighting is a righteous battle. The other side has not compromised at all. It has completely demolished the slightest compromise opportunity that we all came up with. And so therefore you have every right to fight this battle. And therefore, let Ishvara take over your free will. That is Krishna's message. Let Ishvara work through you, through your very tendencies. Those very tendencies can lead us towards ajnana, maya, getting more into bondage. But those very tendencies at the service of the Lord will take us towards jnana and mukti. And so here was an opportunity where those very tendencies of Arjuna, of sattva and rajas, the Kshatriya temperament is sattva rajas, mixture of sattva and rajas. And so those very tendencies here have this beautiful opportunity to lead you to freedom. Let go and give space for Ishvara to take over your role. Because you are in alignment with dharma, then Ishvara is operating through you. And so that is why Krishna here talks of Ishvaraha sarvabhutanam, etc., saying that Lord is within you as your very nature. Now go along with it. Don't try to artificially bring in your own likes and dislikes, your raga dveshas, which are blinding you from seeing what is the right thing to do. And here Krishna also says that the absence of free will indicates, in an ultimate sense, that much of our sorrow, our distress, the human sorrow and distress, is because of non-acceptance of Ishvara. The second shloka highlights this very aspect, and it kind of ties in with this earlier shloka. These are two, like I said, consecutive shlokas. So the second shloka expresses that very important idea of Sharanagati. So we'll read that, and then we will see how Krishna's final message here is Bhagavan's selection of our text also being concluded. Krishna says, Tameva sharanam gaccha sarvabhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam. Tameva sharanam gaccha sarvabhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam. So he says, to that Ishvara who dwells in your heart, you surrender. Sharanam gaccha. Resort to this attitude of surrender. Tameva, tam Ishvarameva sharanam gaccha. Sarva bhavena bharata. So in all ways, it implies your mind and your body and your speech all are aligned with that Ishvara. There is no conflict either inside, internally, or outwardly in behavior. Sarva bhavena sharanam gaccha. In all ways, you can safely unite your actions and your speech and your inner feeling together as in line with Ishvara. So this is a very general principle here, that in any situation, our sorrow is because of resisting Ishvara. So in a situation, there is some unpleasantness, okay, that is from the situation, but sorrow is my call. Sorrow is my creation. When I resist a certain situation without giving space for Ishvara, without accepting the Lord as He is, then there is sorrow. Where there is acceptance of the situation, and then I do what I have to do. Okay? It doesn't mean it's a passive acceptance. Accepting Ishvara in a given situation implies I don't resent what is. I don't resent the situation. Could be the people around, could be some unpleasant, experience. So I recognize that there is an infallible order here, and I surrender, meaning I accept Ishvara as the creator of that situation. And when I prayerfully do that, I develop that space. I don't internalize and carry that situation in my intellect. I don't load it in my mind like a burden. I carry it around, oh, poor me. And so therefore, when I have that attitude of surrender to Ishvara, I am already one step removed from the situation itself. I no longer carry it within me, because I recognize Ishvara has made this situation the way it is. And then I try to do what I can do. I'm not lazy or passive or pessimistic. I very actively do what I have to do, but there is no despondency. There is no pessimism there. It is a graceful, dignified acceptance of the situation and a bold decision. Whatever you need to do, you do. So that is the idea of surrender here. Remember, when we say Ishvara makes the whole world go around, it implies that every single thing around you, every human being, is the way he or she is because of that cosmic order, which is called Ishvara here. So if there is someone around you who is of a certain nature and it is creating distress for you, that means I am not yet fully aligned with Ishvara there. Instead, I recognize, okay, that person has certain buttons, that person has certain limitations. He has, even if it be certain harsh tendencies in him, all that is fine. There is no lack of objectivity in saying all of that. And yet, I don't carry that person within me. I don't burden myself with the load of these people around me. Instead, I stay centered in Ishvara and then do what I can do to remedy the situation if I can. But even if my effect is limited, still I do not get overwhelmed with that situation. That is the meaning of Tameva Sharanam Gacha Sarva Bhavena Bharata. So Krishna is telling Arjuna here, look, you might not want your cousins to be the way they are. You might not want Bhishma to be on the side of the, adharmic people. You have to fight your own grandsire, Bhishma. You have to fight your own respected teacher. You don't want it like that. So Arjuna is asking, why me? Why is this happening to me? And Krishna is saying, there are other forces which are not in your control, but you can do what you have to do. If you have to fight, you fight. The same situation of the battlefield, when it applies to Drona, his call was he had to withdraw from the battlefield. It is not his dharma to fight that battle. It's not as if in every fight between dharma and adharma, everyone should get involved. Not at all the case. There are some people whose dharma is to fight the battle of right versus wrong. They are supposed to do that. The rest of the people are not expected to get involved. In fact, that is why Drona was therefore advised by people around him to gracefully withdraw, not participate in that war. And it took a long time for him to reconcile to that. So, like I mentioned in one earlier lecture, it is said that in one version, he withdrew first from the battlefield, not in response to Yudhishthira telling a lie. That's there in some of the folk versions of the Mahabharata, not in the authoritative critical edition. The Mahabharata has many editions. So there is something called a critical edition of the Mahabharata, which means all the editions have been compared and what is authoritative and authenticated, those verses alone are retained and by the scholars and acharyas. That is known as the critical edition of the Mahabharata. Because so many people have later introduced some other stories and verses and so on into the Mahabharata. And so in that critical edition, it is mentioned that after a certain point of time, Drona was very, disillusioned with the whole progression, and he, in response to the prayers and advice of the rishis, withdrew from the battlefield, and then he was killed as per the prarabdha, which he was had to undergo. So the point here is to say that it's not as if everyone has to fight every single battle here, but Arjuna's dharma was to fight, and therefore Krishna says, surrender to that which you cannot change, do what you have to do. Tameva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bharata. And so we notice here that it's not just an advice given at the level of psychology. Instead, it is a recognition that all that exists is one universal being, Ishvara. And so the more we are alive to that truth, the more we connect to that Ishvara, the more we are untouched by what is happening in the world. Otherwise, it's such a burden. Even the very fact we have to get up in the morning and face this world for the next so many decades is actually an existential nightmare. So if we really think about it that way, as a small, limited being fighting this vast and unfriendly, as it were, cosmos, it's a losing battle. It's a battle you can never win. But that same battle becomes one in which you are untouched. It's a play for you if you are able to connect with Ishvara, the universal intelligence. That is the beauty, that is the relief here. That is the freedom from distress that Ishvara is graciously telling us. That if we are able to discover and connect by not resisting what is, by unloading from our mind what we don't have to carry within us, and by recognizing that same Ishvara as the witness consciousness, Hriddeshe Arjuna Tishtati, we are free from samsara, we are free from sorrow. So those are the two steps. First, accepting Ishvara's will in one's life, and second, discovering that Ishvara dwelling in one's heart as the very self, who is untouched and yet who illuminates everything that happens. That in our Hriddeshe or Hridaya Deshe, O Arjuna, I am there. So that very Ishvara is there as the self, who is the witness and who is free of all limitations. So these two steps are there. Surrender to Ishvara, recognition of Ishvara in the heart. They go together. And so these two shlokas very quintessentially sum up the entire message of the Gita, saying, Tameva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam. Tat prasadat. So by that prasada means by the grace. But the grace here, remember, is not just like a gift bestowed unasked. People sometimes assume it's like that. But in the entire tradition of the Vedas and Vedanta, grace is not something that is just dispensed like manna from heaven or something. It is something we earn. We earn grace by our actions and our attitude. Both are there. Our actions and attitude both go together to earn us grace. Grace is therefore an earned thing. Otherwise, Ishvara can easily be accused of being, whimsical or partial, which is even worse than, an Ishvara who doesn't show any grace. It's always nicer to have a fair deal. It's not right if Ishvara just whimsically gives grace to somebody and somebody he doesn't give the grace for no logical reasons at all. And so therefore, Krishna here says grace is something we earn by our attitude and our actions. So by that grace, tat prasadat, what happens? Param shantim prapsyasi. We are then able to get that freedom from all the sorrow. Param means the final peace, that final freedom from all sorrow. Because there are relative, freedoms from sorrow, so to speak. Sometimes we feel nice, we feel things are going our way in life, but that is all apekshika. That's not the param shanti. That is some shanti temporarily there. But this param shanti is born of discovering Ishvara both in one's life and in one's heart. Okay? Surrender, that is in one's life, accepting what is, doing what you can, and discovering, which is seeing that Chaitanyam which I am, which is of the nature of Ishvara, is untouched. It is of the nature of freedom. It is pure Shuddha Chaitanyam. And so thus tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam. That alone is the permanent goal, the goal that will not leave us. Once you attain it, it stays with you. Every other achievement is going to go away sooner or later. But this attainment of Ishvara, discovery of Ishvara as the self, is not going to go away. Because it's not the product of any of your karmas. The fact that I am one with the Lord is a pre-existing fact. It's something I just discovered. And all my sorrow is because of not paying attention to that. It's not because of any other external cause. So I am not paying attention to a treasure, as it were, which I have, that I am always connected to Ishvara, to Krishna within. I'm always connected. When I don't pay attention to that, then of course I am denying myself that treasure. And so here, tat prasadat param shantim, it says shashvatam phalam. Here, the result is permanent, because it's not really a karma phala. The self-knowledge or even the attitude of Sharanagati is not a karma phala here. It is an attitude born of clarity. It is right understanding of what one is. And so therefore, this transformation is permanent. Even if we don't talk of enlightenment, even a few steps taken in that direction is unidirectional. You don't come back. It's like a one-way street. So if we take a few steps genuinely towards understanding Ishvara in one's life, discovering Ishvara in one's heart, that journey too is not something you come back from. Even if there is a minor variation, largely it is what they call a journey towards Ishvara, which continues birth after birth. Krishna's assurance is that even if a person doesn't complete that journey, you pick up the thread afterwards. Every other achievement goes down the drain. But this achievement, quote unquote, of discovering Ishvara as all that exists, in other words, I stop resisting and fighting this creation. I have a harmonious relation with what is, even if it's unpleasant. And secondly, discovering that I am is of the nature of pure Shuddha Chaitanyam, free of any blemish. These two aspects, when I am able to internalize, even to a certain extent, that is my net gain in my life. So if I do an accounting at the end of the life, or even an intermediate accounting, what is my net gain? What have I achieved in my life? Have I made any meaningful journey or progress in anything at all? Well, every other progress, financially, career-wise, other relationships, family, everything is kind of iffy. It will have some up, some down. But this, the equation with Ishvara, it goes from strength to strength. That's the real net result that accrues to our account, to our permanent account as well. So it is Shashvatam, it's called here. Prapsyasi Shantim Shashvatam. You will attain the total freedom from sorrow. Like I said, even the intermediate steps, the same truth holds for that. And so these two verses thus emphasize how we can cultivate this attitude of surrender in one's life. If you remember how Bhagavan always emphasizes self-inquiry and surrender. Atma Vichara and Sharanagati. These two are like the, you can say, the twin engines of Bhagavan's teaching. And they're not even contradictory. It's not as if you do self-inquiry, you cannot have or develop the attitude of surrender. They're actually quite complementary. And it's more a question of etymology and more a question of words being used differently. So a person who is better able to relate to Ishvara as this intelligent being, for him, the attitude of Sharanagati works. Like I said, which means accepting what is in your life without murmur, recognizing there's an infallible principle at work there. Why should I worry? A doctor is there, fine, he might give me an injection, but I have the trust that whatever is happening is going to make me a better person. And that doesn't mean I just accept. I also may do certain things. Born of that understanding, born of surrender, I will make the right choices. So surrender, remember, doesn't mean something passive. It just means that I'm able to get beyond my likes and dislikes, raga, dveshas, and then I do what I have to do. My free will, so to speak, if it's there, becomes aligned with Ishvara. So what I'm doing is what Ishvara actually intends, so to speak, to work out through me. That is why Arjuna was being asked, set aside your raga dveshas, your likes and dislikes, and make yourself an instrument in my hands. So the same process is what each one of us undergoes in this process called surrender, Sharanagati. And then the other complementary sadhana, Atma Vichara. So as you quieten your mind, unload what is there in it, shift your attention to the I, shift your attention to that pure consciousness. You discover that I is something that is of the very nature of Ananda. Happiness is not something that I need to get from outside. Happiness is of the very nature of the self. I get a glimpse of that. I get a certain conviction. These are not just words, this is the reality. When I discover without any external pleasantness or any external stimulation, I find so much peace and happiness within me. So when I'm able to tap that, I gain the conviction. Atma is Ananda Swarupaha. These words are, of course, that what you recognize, but the process is Atma Vichara. So you draw in the mind, shift your attention to the I, stay put there. You will find the mind resolves, the Aham Sphurana, as Bhagavan calls it, takes place. The Aham Sphurana means I shining without any limitation. You first get a glimpse of that, then that itself becomes your sadhana. You can now use that as the alambana to come back to that. You have some clarity. What is this path of who am I? You get a clarity there. So Bhagavan, that's why he says that this who am I method has these two stages. If you remember, I reiterate that in several contexts. Initially, you're okay, struggling with the mind, with the thoughts, they keep drawing you out. And so your attention is more to disregard the content of your mind and thoughts. Pay attention to that which is doing the thing, that which is the field, the space in which all this is happening. What is that? You have this very open-ended shifting of attention to that consciousness, which is as it were a field or a space in which these thoughts are coming and going. When you do that open, why I say open-ended, because you don't try to conclude, this consciousness is Brahman or this consciousness is that. You don't use too many words there. Bhagavan didn't want another concept to creep in there. He just says, okay, shift your attention from the content of your mind to the very I which is doing the thinking. What is the nature, the swarupa of this I? Just have that as an implicit inquiry principle. And then Bhagavan says, what happens then? You discover that I resolves as aham, pure I, pure consciousness. And you discover, therefore, you gain that conviction that ananda is not something from the outside. All happiness really doesn't come from the outside. It is the very nature of aham. In fact, unhappiness needs reasons. Happiness doesn't need a reason. So we always think, I need a reason to be happy. Well, in the teaching of Bhagavan and the Bhagavad Gita, that situation is reversed. You need a reason really to be unhappy. And that reason is actually our own minds thinking about the situation. The situation itself never creates any big unhappiness. Our minds thinking about the situation creates the unhappiness. Then again, if the mind stops resisting the situation, happiness is already there as the underlying truth of what you are. So this very profound, recognition happens that ananda is natural. Anananda or dukkha needs complicated thinking, complicated emotions. That creates dukkha. Which is why when there is a continuous negative emotion for a length of time, a person feels drained. He doesn't want to do anything. He just wants to withdraw into his shell or her shell. Why? Because a distressing emotion is not your swabhava or your real nature. It is alien to you, like a thorn in your foot. You want to get rid of it. And you recognize that it's not coming from the situation, but your processing, your cognitive processing of the situation is creating the dukkha. So you are empowered in a way. You take responsibility for this distress. Hey, I am actually unwittingly creating this distress for myself. So if you are able to, by the practice of self-inquiry, by the Sharanagati Buddhi, come to that, then that's the first step. Okay? You have come to that I as Aham Swarana. In other words, I is the source of all Ananda. These words gain conviction in you. And then, of course, that becomes like the truth to which you fall back on. The rest of your life is a living out of and getting rid of the illusions. All the contrary notions, the viparita bhavanas are then processed and dismissed. So Bhagavan therefore uses the word vasanas. The vasana here implies all the contrary notions are then dealt with. First, aham swarana, coming back to I am as limitless ananda swarupa. And then next step is a lifelong process of seeing that all the other tendencies and vasanas in the mind don't really affect or change the truth of what I am. So you don't really have to worry that the vasanas are, overpowering me. Not really. You recognize that they are not overpowering you. Even if the vasanas come, they just come and go. You don't get, again sorrowful. Oh, the vasanas are there. Not like that. Instead, that very falling back on that aham, that I, as Shuddha Chaitanyam, deals with these viparita bhavanas, contrary notions, which are obstructing you from tapping and staying established, abiding as the self. So that's the last stage. Okay. So in this way, this message sums up the entire Bhagavad Gita in a very beautiful way. Then there is a concluding a colophon of a shloka. We will just read that to complete this study of our selected verses. In the next session, which is on the next Sunday, we will have a summary of this entire 42 verses, highlighting a few key points. I may not do all the shlokas, but it will be a helpful way of summarizing the message of Bhagavan and the Bhagavad Gita, how they converge to bless us in two different and yet very similar ways. So it will be a summary of this entire work here. That will be on the next class. So today we will read this last concluding shloka, which is a salutation to Bhagavan who has compiled these 42 verses. Saro yamiha sarasya hitaya suvirajate sangrahito bhagavata ramanena maharshina. Saro yamiha sarasya gitaya suvirajate sangrahito bhagavata ramanena maharshina. The verse here says that Saroyam iha sarasya. This is the quintessence of the Bhagavad Gita. Sarasya saram, the essence of the essence. So Bhagavad Gita itself is the essence of the Upanishads. And of the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan has again extracted and given us, presented these essential or very significant verses in the Bhagavad Gita. Saroyam iha sarasya. Gitayaha suvirajate. Of the Gita, this illuminates. Suvirajate means this shines forth. This work of Gita Saraha shines forth, illuminating our intellect. So remember that the verses and the words of the Shastra, words of the Gita, are a direct way of illuminating the intellect. They are not just some intellectual study or a game or a certain verbal gymnastics going on there. Most people who have not studied the Vedanta Shastra sometimes talk like that. But this is a Shabda Pramana. So all the Acharyas are very clear. The Gita is a Shabda Pramana. It's a Smriti which is of the nature of knowledge itself. The words of Bhagavan directly convey the knowledge. Then, of course, we internalize and assimilate the knowledge. So our responsibility is to understand and then assimilate that. But the words themselves convey direct aparoksha jnanam. People sometimes use the words like paroksha jnanam. The meaning is that, yes, there is some homework to be done, no doubt. But the jnanam conveyed by the Bhagavad Gita and by the Upanishads is aparoksha jnanameva. It is direct illumination. It's a cognitive shift in your understanding that they are able to achieve. And generally, those who have properly approached the Guru's tradition, they understand this idea of Shabda Pramana. That is why this word Suvirajate, it is shining, directly illuminating the intellect. It's not like a recipe which I look up on the internet and then I have to go and make something out of it. So if I'm able to have that Pramanatva Buddhi, that Shraddha of these words, I'm able to see the meaning even as I hear and contemplate on those words, then that itself is the knowledge. No doubt that knowledge you get a glimpse, and after that the contrary notions and the vasanas have to be dealt with, which is of course what Bhagavan says of self-inquiry and so on. But it cannot be by underestimating the value of these words. So remember that the Gita words are Shabda Pramanam. Words as a direct sacred means of knowledge, not just giving some concepts. So that is an important thing here mentioned as Suvirajate. It shines forth, illuminating our mind and intellect. And Sangrahitaha, means it has been compiled, put together by Bhagavata Ramanena Maharshina, by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. So normally, whenever I think of the word Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi, we get used to hearing it, and perhaps we don't pay too much attention to that because the word Bhagavan is often loosely or very commonly used to refer to respected people, respected figures, acharyas, gurus of different denominations. They're all called Bhagavan, Bhagavan. But in the case of Sri Bhagavan Sri Ramana or Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, that word has 100% resonance. And the reason is that Jivan Mukta and those who are like one with the very self, one with the self of the universe, in their case, that word Bhagavan sits most comfortably. It's not an exaggeration or a mere statement of respect for them. If some of you have heard this word Bhagavan, the very meaning is one endowed with these 6 bhagas. Bhagas are 6 glories. 6 glories such as Samagram Vairagyam, they have total Vairagya. And Samagram Jnanam, they know the truth of all that exists. They are Sarvajna. Samagram Dharma, so Sarva Dharma, they have the commitment to Dharma, and as well as they have the understanding of the truth of the nitty-gritty as well, meaning they are one with all the names and forms as well. Dharma in the form of order is also one with them. They are not separate from that. Ishvara is manifest as this entire Dharma. Dharma here means this cosmic intelligent creation. And so that is also that same Bhagavan. He is Samagram Jnanam, he has all knowing. He is one with all the Dharma, which is this cosmic order, or everything that exists. He is Samagram Vairagyam, he is untouched and he is totally uninvolved, even though he is everywhere. If the Vairagya is not there, what happens? Well, it will be like the case of a householder who has, let's say, 2 children and a wife and parents to support. He is having so much of burden on him. And Ishvara becomes like a massive householder having billions of living beings he has to support. He is going to be under great suffering and stress. Only because of the Vairagya, Ishvara doesn't have any suffering. He can maintain this huge cosmic family of billions of human beings without any stress, without feeling the load and the burden. Oh, why are these living beings, my children, behaving like this? Why are they fighting amongst themselves? Well, he is having that Vairagya. He blesses those who deserve his blessing, but he is not going to suffer on account of the blemishes and defects of the creation. That is Samagram Vairagyam. And Samagram Yashas. So he has all the fame and all the glory that is truly deserving for him. He is Samagram Yashaha. And then finally, he has Samagram Shri, all the wealth of different kinds, whatever is regarded as valuable in this world, all that also belongs or is derived from Ishvara. So in this way, all the Shad Bhagas are implicit and inherent in Ishvara. So Bhagavata Ramanena Maharshina. So the very word Maharshi, as you know, is of the one who sees. Okay, Maha means great, Rishi is Rishati Janati Rishiki. So the one who has that vision, that understanding of truth, he is one with that very truth. He is a Maharshi. So this word Bhagavan sits most comfortably on Sri Ramana Maharshi. And this shloka embodies that very idea. And so we will now summarize in the next session all these verses. And with that, we will be concluding this series of talks on these 42 selected verses. If any questions are there, you can ask. Otherwise, we will conclude with the Shanti Mantra. Okay, so we'll conclude with the Shanti Mantra for today. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Guru Namaha. Harihi Om. Anuragji, if you're there, you can take over.
Raghavji, on behalf of all the devotees for the last 1 year, I would like to express a lot of deep gratitude and thanks for the wonderful, enlightening talks that you have shared with us, that you have guided us for. Uh, this has been an illuminating journey, and of course, we shall continue the path in your guidance with some new scriptures, hopefully from next month onwards, for which I shall discuss with you very soon. So, thank you. It has been a blessed time. Uh, I do not see any questions coming in either on YouTube or on Zoom, or neither on WhatsApp. So I shall now request Narayananji to initiate Akshar Manamalai and Aarti. Raghavji, thank you so much, sir.
Recite 14th stanza, Aksharmani Malai, followed by Aarti. Tarunarunamani Tirinavali Nigar Tarumaksharamana Magulmalai Tirunadiya Tiru Adiya Tirumara Kariya Paravudar Purulaga Karunagaramuni Ramanari Enuva Gainal Solliyadu Gadiyaga அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே அறிவோடும் ஆழ்வார் சிவனுருகு ஆழ்வாரே அருணாச்சலவரம் கேற்ற அக்ஷரமணமாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கரம் அருளி காப்பாயே அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை வேறறுப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகம் நீயும் அபிநமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகமுகுந்தீர்த்துன் அகதுகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆருக்காயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றி அகிலம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்பழித்த புனையே நினைப்பித்தாய் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னை பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் இதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல உனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா ஊர் சுற்று உளம்பிடா உன்னை கண்டு அடங்கி உன் அழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல 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 சிவ அருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்தி போல் என்னை களவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த ஊரக்கம் என்னை பிறர் இழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல ஐம்புல கழ்வர் அகத்தினில் புகும்போது அகத்தில் நீலையோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவனா முன்னை ஒளித்தேவர் வருவார் உன் சூதி இது அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல ஓங்கார பொருள் உயர்வில்லை உனையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா அவ்வை போல் எனக்குன் அருளை தந்து என்னை ஆழ்வது உன் கடல் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழி तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवसवितुर्सत्यं तदेन प्रसन्यामि अमृतं स्वाहा ॐ प्राणाय स्वाहा अपानाय ज्ञानाय स्वाहा उदानाय स्वाहा समानाय स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः कार्तिकाय मुरुगाय वल्ली दैवाय नमः सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः स्वामीनाथन नमः दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः नटराजरे भैरवरे नंदीवैसाय शिव पार्वती नमः ओम नमः शिवाय 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 नमः पुरगंड गोशीरं नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपतांत उत्तराभूषणं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्वनीयं समर्पयामि पूगीबल समायुक्तं नागवल्ली तलयोर्धं कर्पूर्णसोर्णसुगन्धप्रदीप्तां कर्पूर नीराजनं श्रीरमणमहर्षिके समर्पयामि पुष्पं वेद पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पशुमान् भवति चन्द्रमा भावां पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पशुमान् भवति ॐ तद्ब्रह्मा ॐ तद्वायु ॐ तदात्मा ॐ तत्सत्यम् ॐ तत्सर्वम् ॐ तत्पुरोर्नमः अन्तर्जाति भूते तद्वायां विश्वमूर्तिषु त्वमेव नृत्तं वसन्कारं तं इन्द्रस्तं रुद्रस्तं विष्णुस्तं ब्रह्मस्तं प्रजापति ॐ तदावो ज्योतिषोमृतं पूर्वपुस्सरं न कर्मणा न प्रजयादने नित्यानेके अमृतत्वमानसो परेण नाहं नीतं भुवायं विप्राजते दत्यति यो विसन्धि वेदान्तविज्ञानते नित्यदाता सन्न्यासयोगातने शुद्धसत्त्वाः ते ब्रह्मलोके तु परान्तकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे परं विभावं परमेश्वरभूतं यत् पुण्डरीकं पुरमध्य सगं सदं तत्रावित्तगणमकगणं विशोगस् तस्मिन् यदन्तं दशभासित्यं यो वेदान्तोऽसुरं प्रोक्तो वेदान्तसत्यप्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमहेश्वरः मन्त्रपुष्पं विरमणमहर्षिक्यं मन्त्रपुष्पं कार्तिकाय दुर्गावल्लीदेव मन्त्रपुष्पं शिवपार्वतीक्यं समर्पयामि ॐ तत्सत्कृपार्भवस्तु हरि ओं हरि ओं हरि ओं शम्भो शम्भो गणेशाय गोविन्दाय रमाय
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the conclusion of today's satsang with Raghavji. We shall reconvene next Sunday for a summary of all the 42 select verses of from Bhagavad Gita as compiled by Bhagwan Raman Maharishi. Since it would be the concluding session, I would request all the devotees to share in advance any questions or thoughts or any form of gratitude and thanks for Raghavji that they may want to express. Namo Ramana.